Hey guys, my name's Nick. I'm a service technician with Marine Part Source Specialty Services. And today we're in the boathouse. We have a customer here that says his alternator's not putting out. We're gonna diagnose it, check it, and make sure that it is. If it's not, we have another alternator here that we're gonna replace it with. So if you guys are ready, let's dive on in.
Alright, so the first step is identifying if the alternator is actually bad. And the way we do this is to measure the voltage with the DC meter set to DC volts at the battery. We do not want to turn the engine on yet, we want to see what the actual battery voltage is. And here it's showing 13.2.
Okay guys, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to fire up the engine. We're going to head back to the engine to make sure that the alternator is putting out a proper charge voltage. If not, we should see the stagnant battery voltage, which should be around 12 volts. So I'm going to go ahead and fire up the engine.
We should see the voltage climb to roughly 1 to 1.5 volts on the DC meter. As you can see, the voltage is staying the same from when we measured just the battery, so that's telling us the alternator is not functioning as it should. So the first thing we're going to do as a safety precaution before we remove the alternator is we're going to disconnect the negative lead going to the engine to the battery. To remove this alternator, there are two bolts that hold this alternator in place. There's a 3/4 inch bolt that actually mounts the alternator, and there's also a 9/16 bolt that is used to adjust the belt tensioner on the alternator as well. Both of these bolts have to be broken free so that we can remove the alternator. I find the easiest way to do this is to slightly loosen the 3/4 inch bolt on the right hand side of the alternator and then remove the belt tensioner bolt. Once the belt tensioner bolt is removed, you can then move the alternator towards the center of the engine and loosen the belt and remove it off the pulley. Now with the belt off, we should just have to remove the 3/4 inch bolt and the alternator should come loose. With the alternator loose, there should just be two wires attached to the back of the alternator, a positive and ground. Now you can either take a picture of the positioning on the studs, or in this case, I took a Sharpie marker and marked where my positive and negative were on the alternator. Once the positive and negative are removed from the back of the alternator should be completely free and removed. Now it's time to install our new alternator. The first thing I would do is look at the instructions that come with the new alternator so you can identify your positive and negative posts. Once you have those identified, then go ahead and reinstall the positive and negative lead you took off the old alternator onto the new alternator. Now it's time to mount the alternator. The first thing I would do is I'd put the 3/4 inch bolt back in place and lightly snug it up. Then I would mount the 9/16 bolt going into the belt tensioner, then pull the alternator towards the center of the engine, slide the belt back on, and then pull the alternator away from the center of the engine, tightening the belt. Then snug up both bolts. You should have roughly between 1/4 to 1/2 inch of play when wiggling the alternator belt back and forth. This ensures that the alternator belt is not too loose or too tight. Now with the wires reconnected to the new alternator, it's mounted and the belt is tight, it's time to reconnect the ground cable to the battery and fire up the engine to see if our new alternator is putting out the proper voltage.
Alright, so now we've taken the defective alternator off the engine. We've now put the new alternator on. When we originally took our voltage readings, we were seeing right around 13.2 volts. Now, with the fully charged battery, that's normal. With the engine on, we should have seen that voltage climb up to 14.2, 14.4, somewhere around that area. It did not do that, so we know the alternator was not putting out the proper voltage. With the new alternator installed, we're now going to check the voltage and see what it's putting out now. So I've got my voltmeter here. I'm going to turn this to DC volts. stick my positive probe, positive terminal, negative probe, negative terminal, and we have 14.39 volts. So we know the new alternator is doing its job and providing the correct voltage to the battery. So we've swapped out the defective alternator, that was our issue, and installed a new alternator that is functioning properly. If you guys need any help with projects you're working on, you can always give our ABYC certified technicians a call at the number below. If you found this video helpful, please like this video and subscribe to our channels. And if you need anything else, you can go to our website at marinepartsource.com. Thanks for joining us.